Hello everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here, a full day late, because unfortunately I'm super busy right now, but I did want to make a video talking about the Magic blog that Creative Assembly released. This is just another major checkmark in things that we've been wanting to see, taking us closer and closer to the release of Total War Warhammer 3. I could just taste it on the air, and man, it is starting to get really exciting. I do apologize for being late. I'm going to be trying to be on top of things as best I can over the next 2 weeks, but of course I leave for Scotland in, I think, just a couple days, and I'm going to be gone for a little while, but I have managed to kind of figure out a system that's going to let me be able to still put out content and stuff, but it'll be a little loosey-goosey and we'll play by ear. But in any event, let's go ahead and cover this, which is basically that they have shown us all the lores of Magic, except for one, which is the pre-order race, which we all know who it is at this point, but obviously they don't want to give it up just yet. Hopefully we will have that delicious day in the near future. But for right now, we got all these different lores to check out, so let's look at the new lores of Magic, and they showed off everybody here. So each of the lores has 6 spells as standard, so one of the spells from tabletop did not make it into each lore, which is per usual for Total War Warhammer. So first off, we've got the lore of Zinch. So the first spell Zinch has is the Blue Fire of Zinch, which makes it that with a twist of a hand, the spellcaster causes the bodies of their opponents to be consumed by coruscating blue flames. It's a single target magic missile that applies the Warp Flame debuff, which increases fire damage received, and the Overcast version deals increased armor-piercing damage. And here we can actually see what Warp Flame does, and we can also see this new fancy tooltip system for Magic. Look how much delightful information is on here, where it tells you the damage per second, they tell you what percentage of the damage is armor-piercing, what attributes it has, so you can see that it's fire and magical damage, how long it lasts, how big it is, and this one's a vortex spell, so it even tells you how fast the spell moves, and then it says on contact, it gives the Warp Flame debuff. Then you have the range, the cooldown, and then the little bonus things. So Warp Flame grants an 11% resist or weakness to fire and minus 15 armor. That is so much better than it was in tabletop, where it used to give your opponents regeneration, which was terrible. So if you get touched by a Zinch spell, or by the Flamers of Zinch, which we know apply the Warp Flame debuff on their missile and combat attacks, you will be more vulnerable to fire damage, and your armor goes down, which is very, very powerful for an army where almost everything does fire damage. So, yeah, pretty spooky. So we've got just a basic magic missile spell that, of course, can be overcast in order to deal more armor piercing. I think this is the spell that we see. Yeah, this is definitely the spell we see Kairos use in the trailer. So if you watch the Cathay reveal trailer, when Kairos unleashes like the giant, like it's like a whole bunch of little missiles that spin in a circle, like spin around each other, and they slam into the sky junk and the sky lantern. That was this spell, the Blue Fire of Zinch. Though I'm guessing he overcast it because it like, obliterated that poor thing. Next, you got the Pink Fire of Zinch, which is a breath attack. A roiling tide of iridescent energy flows from the spellcaster, enveloping their enemies in a cone of searing magical flame. So it's conal damage, so, you know, it's a breath spell like Edbutt from the lore of the Big Wa, or Warp... What is it? Warp Fire? I forget what the spell is called, but there's a Skaven spell that does that. There's a couple of breath spells. Wind Blast, stuff like that. But this one is actually super useful. A lot of the breath spells can be kind of difficult to aim, even though it's a lot better than it used to be. But this one inflicts the Warp Flame debuff, so it'll be pretty easy way to just get that debuff on a lot of units, hopefully. Treason of Zinch is a area hex that you throw on the ground, and it lowers the leadership of all enemies in the area, like Doom and Darkness. However, if you overcast it, it also lowers their melee attack. Brutal. Next up is Glean Magic. This one is the most interesting one in my opinion, and I hope they make this into like a mechanic that exists throughout the game, because I feel like this is very close to what I could envision a Dispel system having, where you have systems that allow you to attack just enemy wizards, to try and cut off their magic and make casting hard for them. And that's what Gleam Magic does. It is a spell that allows you to steal your opponent's magic. It increases your power recharge speed and also increases your reserves pool while decreasing your enemies. So it's basically just like if you and your opponent are filling hourglasses of sand, right? You basically make it where you flip your opponents over for a little bit and you're stealing all the extra sand, which is really cool. I love that spell. I would love to see that just be kind of a mechanic. But maybe for Zinch, where Zinch is like stealing your reserves pool and recharge rate, I would love that if there was a dispel mechanic kind of thing, maybe, or anti-magic at least, it is more of just you reducing your opponent's recharge speed and reserves pool. I really think that should be standard for powerful wizards, is just the ability to try and limit your opponent's casting capabilities. Next up, Zinch's Firestorm. It is a vortex that summons 3 vortexes. So you throw a vortex on the ground and 3 big old warp flame towers come flying out of it and start ripping into people. And we can actually see this spell on display from the Herald of Zinch or Iridescent Horror. I'm not sure. I think that's the Herald. But you could see how it summons 3 individual pillars, because Zinch is too cool to have a single vortex. It's got to be a triple vortex. And you can upgrade it. Does, of course, it applies Warp Flame. You can upgrade it to have more armor piercing damage. And then the Infernal Gateway. So the Infernal Gateway is a massive stationary area damage. So it's kind of like Pit of Shades. So it's, you click it on the ground and it's gonna do some kind of crazy ass effect where it does a ton of damage to everyone standing in that area. And you can overcast it, of course, deal additional armor piercing. Then we've got Slaanesh. Slaanesh and Nergal have showed up to the party. So down there, it looks like we've either got a Herald of Slaanesh or a, I forget what the unit champions are called. I'll kind of look it up over here in a second. But the spell list is looking pretty solid. Where is my Demon's Book? There's my Demon's Book. Ah! So, we've got the Lash of Slaanesh, which is a breath weapon. The Exquisite Kiss of the Dark Prince's 3-tailed whip strikes the enemy with a delicious fury. I like the words they're using. So it is a conal damage spell that is noted for sending enemies flying. So I'm guessing that it is a spell that specializes in having significant knockback, as opposed to just, you know, regular knockback. Or, you know, where Wind Blast is really good at knocking people over. I wonder if it's going to be like that, or if it's legitimately going to send people flying, which could be kind of hilarious. But, so you've got the Herald of Slaanesh, and then it's going to be the Alluris. So the Alluris is going to be the hero version of the Demonette, and then we'll get to Nergal in a moment. Next is Acquiescence. So Acquiescence, the spellcaster's corrupting touch puts their victims into a blissful euphoric state for a short time, rendering them little able to move, let alone defend themselves. So this one decreases the speed and melee defense of a target unit, and you can overcast it to have a larger effect on speed. That's probably going to be a very popular spell, if I had to guess, just because lowering speed and melee defense basically means you pick a unit that's trying to run away from you, and they're going to have a bad time. Next up, Hysterical Frenzy, which is actually seeing a bit of an interesting change. So Hysterical Frenzy in tabletop, you could actually use it, I think, on enemies and allies, but it would cause damage to people after it went through. But in this one, it's the caster's victims are engulfed by a torrent of unreasoning emotion, excruciating pain, and blissful rapture, causing them to embark on a riotous, clawing rampage. So this is purely an augment, but the unit you select gets better armor-piercing weapon damage and melee attack, but they get the rampage attribute. So because it only buffs armor-piercing damage, I am personally expecting it to Slaanesh to be the armor-piercing demons. Like, Slaanesh should, because that was Slaanesh's big thing in tabletop, was that the demons of Slaanesh had armor-piercing standard. It was just their thing. So I'm really hoping by focusing on increasing armor-piercing damage, that's going to be the case for Slaanesh demons, is that they're just going to be all about that AP. So, you know, that's probably going to be a very, very popular spell. Rampage, in exchange for just getting better combat stats, I do not think is a bad trade at all. Next is Pavon of Slaanesh. So this is a direct damage, where whistling one of Slaanesh's perverse darkling dances causes the foe's bones to jerk spasmodically until they break. For this, you select a unit, and it will deal damage over time and reduces their melee attack. Great. Awesome. Like, it's a direct damage, so your opponent can't dodge it. You just click on them, and they suffer. Looks awesome. Then you got Slicing Shards, which is a bombardment spell. A mirror forms in the sky, only to be shattered into a myriad of deadly shards that lacerate the enemy below. We can actually see this spell being cast here in this little image, where you can see they've impacted the ground. There's a bunch of explosions everywhere. It looks like she's fighting Nergal units, maybe? But, so bombards the area with deadly exploding glass shards, and you can overcast to deal more damage. And then the final spell is Phantasmagoria. Phantasmagoria says, a complex sigil is performed, transfixing the enemy with a shifting array of hallucinatory images that disjoint and befuddle, inviting their deaths. So you drop it on an area, and everyone in that area, all enemies have their leadership reduced, and prevents movement. So it is an area of effect spell that is a net. So it completely locks the enemy down and reduces their leadership. That is going to be amazing if used properly. That's going to be the best way to catch a group of units and just slam into them with your, your elite cavalry and what have you. So you're going to hopefully be able to just rip into them. And since their leadership is already reduced, they will hopefully break. And since they can't move, you can get a lot of damage in while they're broken. Because if you do a significant amount of damage to a unit that's already been broken, they'll shatter. And then you don't have to worry about them anymore. Also, Slicing Shards, look at that. It's got... It's magic damage. It's 100% armor piercing damage on both the actual ranged projectile itself and the explosion it does. Pure AP. I love to see it. I love to see it. So yeah, that's Slaanesh. The lore looks awesome. I'm kind of shocked not to see Cacophonic Choir as one of the Uber spells. Cacophonic Choir was a how do I say this nicely? It was a spell I, as politely as I can say, fucking hated. I hated that spell. It was the big spell in tabletop, and it was so much bullshit. It was so much bullshit. I hated it. I hated it. It killed so many of my dinosaurs. So I'm not sad to not see it in there. Fuck that spell. I don't miss it. Moving on. We've got Nergal, and here we can see either the Herald of Nergal or the champion, which is the unit champion for Plague Bearers is a Plague Ridden. So the hero of Nergal is going to be the Plague Ridden, and the Lord will be the Herald of Slaanesh. I think this is the Herald, though, based on, because he's got the little bell thing coming out of him, out of his head. He's got that big bell, which I think is based on a tabletop model. But for the lore of Nergal, we've got some really, really cool spells. So first you've got Miasma of Pestilence, which is the most putrescent vapor fills the air, loosening lunches and bowels and causing violent, crippling, vomiting seizures in nearby foes. And so it's you pick an enemy unit and their melee attack and charge bonus goes down. Great. It means that your army is going to be even tankier. So whenever they come running at you, this literally lowers all forms of them connecting those hits against you. Charge bonus and melee attack. You don't have that, you can't hit me. Next up, Stream of Corruption. A poisonous spurt of diseased gas and bile spews forth from the spellcaster's diseased lungs, drenching the enemy in vile, choking pus. It's a long, thin cone attack that leaves a trail of damaging poison and applies poison to all enemies hit. I like how the poison debuff isn't poison, it's poison! It's got an exclamation mark. It has to have the exclamation mark. But this spell, I think, is super duper kick-ass. It's basically the exact same thing as the Skaven spell, where it's just a really thin long trail. But the thing I love about it is that it leaves a trail that deals damage. So it's not just if the spell hits you, it hurts you, but you get a big trail and it stays there for a little bit and deals damage if you stand in it, which I think is much more valuable. Also, hey, poison debuff, great. Curse of the Leper. As the caster speaks, his followers are blessed with resilience, whilst his enemies watch in horror as their limbs wither and drop off. This is my favorite new spell that's been revealed, because it adds armor to your unit and damage reflection. So damage reflection is a mechanic that is popping up all over the place, it looks like, in Total War Warhammer 3. And damage reflection is essentially that there are certain circumstances where it'll specify on a tooltip or what have you, where if you deal damage to a unit under those circumstances, some or all of the damage will be bounced back at you, which is brilliant. We see this also in the lore of Yin. But for Nergal, it's in melee. So you drop Curse of the Leper on a unit, and it gives them damage reflection in melee, so that if somebody hits them, some of that damage will bounce back at the attacker, which is just kick-ass. Like, what a way to make a tanky army even scarier. Next is Rancid Visitations, which we see up here, which can deal 67 to 133 damage per second for 10 seconds. Rancid Visitations. The enemy is gifted with the Plague Lord's nightmarish necrosis, causing their skin to blacken and their internal organs to mulch. Pours filth over an enemy, dealing damage all the while. And the Overcast version lasts longer. Blight Boil. So this one's actually super interesting, because this spell did not exist in Tabletop. This is actually a brand new spell. And Blight Boil says this filthy, pulsating blister rapidly grows before suddenly bursting, showering the enemy with its disgusting fluid and all the maladies contained within. I love this spell. It's disgusting, but it sounds super awesome. So you cast it on the ground, and after a short delay, a giant boil apparently is going to show up and then burst, and everyone under it is going to take a lot of damage. So it's a massive explosion that deals a ton of damage after a short delay. So I'm assuming it's going to kind of be Nergal's answer to... I'm trying to think of another good explosion spell that has a delay. Maybe kind of like Lord Croak's Deliverance of It's a spell, but like super disgusting. And then last is Fleshy Abundance. The most repulsive growth spurt imaginable occurs. The wobbling mounds of fat sealing wounds as soon as they are formed. Greatly replenishes the hit points of a target unit. And if you overcast, it becomes an AoE. So Nergal has a super heal. So he basically has like a regrowth heal, except for when he overcasts it, it's units within an area. So he can have an AoE regrowth, though obviously it doesn't target vigor like regrowth does. That is amazing. I am loving the lore of Nergal. For those unaware, for those interested, the spells that ended up not making it are Plague Wind, which Plague Wind was just a super big vortex spell, essentially. Well, it wasn't a vortex. It was a vortex spell. It was okay. It wasn't great. But Plague Wind, I think could be confusing with like Skaven players who have the spell Plague. So I could see why they kind of put Plague Wind out somewhere else, and I'm sure it'll show up maybe as an army ability or something. And then the other spell they actually replaced with Blight Boil is Blades of Putrefaction. So Blades of Putrefaction was literally just a spell that you would target on a unit and it gave them poison, and if they already had poison, it gave them poison that triggered easier. But since in Total War Warhammer, that's not really a concept, you know, it's either you have poison or you don't, I totally get why they replaced that spell. I'm honestly expecting that Nergal is going to have poison as one of his main mechanics, is just that everything's going to have poison. And since you cannot improve poison, so to speak, without like creating a new tooltip or whatever, it makes it, I think giving them a new spell with Blight Boil instead of trying to make Blades of Putrefaction work was definitely the right idea. I think that was a good decision to make it work better in Total War Warhammer. On to the lores of Yin and Yang. So we've got the lore of Yin. We've heard of these spells, but we didn't know what they do, and now we do. First up is Storm of Shadows. So Storm of Shadows greatly reduces the speed of a target unit. So you just select an enemy unit and they get a lot slower. However, if you overcast it, it becomes an AoE. So you can slow down a whole bunch of enemies, which is great. Speed slows can be massive if used correctly. Though they can also be useless if not used correctly. So it's definitely takes some good planning. Next is the Cloak of Jet. The Cloak of Jet gives a unit snipe, stalk, and unspottable. That is amazing. That is a super good spell. So not only does your unit become invisible with stock, but unspottable means that they are very, very difficult to spot and cannot be seen until someone's really, really close. But then they also have snipe, so they can shoot while invisible and they won't be revealed. That is going to be amazing on the crane gunners, I think, more than anything else. So your crane gunners, you can throw that on them. They can move out into position and just start opening fire, or you might even be able to open it on the another unit. I think it'll actually be super strong on. I forget what they're called, but the girls with the rocket or with the shotguns. The blunderbuss type weapon, that because that weapon is fairly short range, that will probably be a very, very powerful move on them. But of course, it'll be good on your cavalry stuff as well. Blossom Wind is a wind spell that it says column damage spell. So I'm assuming that column damage spell is whenever so a wind spell like Wind of Death, right, where it penumbral pendulum, where it lays down kind of a long line that's got the little wavy lines in it, and it's telling you, okay, something's about to go from here to here, and it's going in a straight line. So this one deals damage and also inflicts the blinded debuff, which is awesome. Blinded is a very, very strong debuff, and you can overcast it to deal additional damage. Missile Mirror, probably one of the most exciting spells in the game, is a spell that you cast and it hurls projectiles back at enemies, which is crazy. The cool thing about it is that it's a hex, so you actually cast it on an enemy unit, and then if they try to shoot, it bounces back at them. So what I really like about this is it's much harder to avoid, in that if your opponent is shooting, if it was an augment that you threw on one of your guys, they could just, you know, immediately switch to shooting something else. This is nice in my opinion because you cast it on an enemy and they just can't shoot unless they're wanting to eat their own damage. So unless someone's micro is really, really good and they're paying super close attention, watching out for this spell, I foresee this spell being devastating against many powerful shooting units. So this is a kick-ass spell. I really, really like it. And the Overcast version not only lasts longer, but even has a longer cast range, so your wizard can hit those further away units, which is great. Next is Talons of Night, which we have seen on the battlefield. Talons of Night is the spell where you see the giant dragon claws coming out. They're like grabbing people, or like pulling them down. There's all the spooky shadow stuff going on. So this one is a large damaging vortex spell that just sits on an area and it seems to last for a good while. And if you overcast, it just deals more damage. Great. And the last is actually a summon. So the Lore of Yin is probably going to be very popular in multiplayer, if I had to guess. Between the missile reflection and the turning units completely invisible, slowing units down, and then a summon on top of that. So Ancestral Warriors allows you to summon a unit of Ancestral Warriors. I'm assuming they are Ghost Boys, but they are it allows you to summon a single halberd infantry unit that's apparently fairly high tier. I'm assuming they're ethereal. Like I imagine that they're going to be ghostly boys, but maybe not. We'll have to wait and see. My guess is they're ghosts, but you can overcast it to have a long cast range. But being able to summon elite halberds, never a bad thing. And then next up is the Lore of Yang. So first you have Jade Shield, which Jade Shield is a ward save. So you cast it on a unit, and it just gives them flat damage resistance. So it's a true ward save. Literally just pick a unit, and boom, damage resistance for a limited amount of time. If you overcast it, lasts longer. Awesome. Dragon's Breath. So Dragon's Breath is a breath attack. It's a conal damage spell that applies a field of fire to burn enemies. So, you know, like Wind Blast and all those other spells, but it shoots fire. Wall of Wind and Fire is a vortex spell. So this is a wide, slow-moving wall of fire damage. So you throw it down somewhere on the battlefield, presumably where everybody's fighting, and it's just a very large wind spell that just creeps across the battlefield, and I assume deals some pretty significant damage. And if you overcast it, it will do armor-piercing damage as well. I'm curious, it seems like it's just a damage spell. Based on the way it's kind of worded with it being like, oh, it sows disorder and confusion, I kind of expected it to have a debuff, but I guess it's just damage. Stone Ground Stance. So Stone Ground Stance, very, very powerful spell, I think. It's just an area of effect spell, and you drop it on the ground. It gives everyone extra mass, leadership, and the expert charge defense trait. That alone is super kick-ass. But the extra mass, I think, is the thing I thought is the most interesting. I would love to see more spells that interact with or manipulate mass. It would be so cool to see spells that, like, reduce enemy units' mass, or more spells that increase mass. Honestly, I could easily see for the dwarfs, if they wanted to have, like, make one of the rune spells really interesting. I think a rune spell that increased the mass of Dawi to make them even more implacable would not be bad. I think that'd actually be really interesting. But Overcast just makes it a wider AoE. But great, I think that's a great spell. Might of Heaven and Earth. So Might of Heaven and Earth, you select a unit, and it gives them magical flaming attacks and increases their melee attack, base damage, and armor-piercing damage. So you just pick a unit and make them kick a lot of ass for a little bit. And if you overcast it, it further increases their stats. So it makes them more likely to hit, increases their chance of hitting, gives them fire damage to punish people that have regeneration or weakness to fire, and then magical attacks, which of course gets through physical resistance. Which I actually think magical attacks are going to be like, you want magical attacks as much as you can find it, because it's no longer a downside. As far as I know, there is no units that are going to exist in Total War Warhammer 3 that have magic resistance. It's just spell resistance now. So having magical attacks is no longer a bad thing. It is purely a good thing. So, because it'll cut through physical resistance, and you know, that's all it does really, but that's still super duper helpful. And demons, we know, are going to have a lot of physical resistance. That is kind of their main thing, is having physical resistance to represent their otherworldliness. So being able to cut through that bonus with magical attacks is going to be a big deal. And then the last spell is the Constellation of the Dragon, which basically summons, it's just a big explosion. It's a giant explosion. So a giant explosion that deals large damage in a big area. Great. If you overcast, it does even more damage. Great. And here we can see the Constellation of the Dragon. It's an explosion that has a 20-meter radius. So it's not gigantic, but it's respectable. Good. It's got a good cast range, 200 meters, and it deals 48 damage, with 33% of that being armor piercing at the base version. If that's 48 damage per entity, then that probably is going to hurt a lot. But anyway, onto the Lore of Ice. So I've actually played with the Lore of Ice during the media event back like forever ago, when we got to play the Brass Citadel showcase battle. So for these spells, I'm not going to focus too much on it, just because we've already messed around. We've already seen these. But you got Ice Sheet, which is that right here. You click it on an area, and it reduces enemy speed and charge speed by 25%. But it's got a very, very large effect radius at 55 meters. And it cannot be overcast. Ice Maid's Breath is a short, wide conal attack that deals damage and applies the Frostbite debuff. So that's nice. You know, Frostbite debuff is a good one to have, especially if you're trying to catch an enemy unit or prevent them from getting an easy charge. And it's a short white conal attack, so I think that's actually more like Edbutt. I think the Greenskin's Edbutt, if I remember, is like a wider cone, but it's very, very short. So it's like that. Frost Blades gives a unit magical attacks and increased weapon damage, armor piercing damage, and melee attack. So just like the Might of Heaven and Earth, except for it gives you no fire. It's just armor piercing and magical, but gonna be incredibly important if you're gonna be fighting demons. Death Frost. Death Frost is you just pick a unit and they take damage over time. Great. Yeah, awesome. Overcast deals more. Cool. Crystal Sanctuary. This one I found really interesting when I played it, which is Crystal Sanctuary is an augment that you pick a unit and they can no longer move, but they have a huge ward save. If I remember right, it's like over 60%. Like, it is a giant ward save. However, the nice thing is you can overcast it to actually affect multiple units, which is pretty kick-ass, not gonna lie. I do like the idea of just picking a whole part of your army and being like, you're invincible now. Um, I think I can't remember if it's that they can't, if it's just they can't move or they can't do anything at all. Because honestly, if it's just they can't move, this could be really good if you throw it on units that are either fighting or shooting. If you have like Streltsy or other units that have like shooting capabilities, then this is, it's a great spell. The Heart of Winter, which is easily the most visually impressive spell that I've seen from CA so far, is a spell that evolves over the time that it's been cast. So it has 3 phases, and each phase deals a certain amount of damage and slows enemies, with those values increasing in strength as the spell continues to evolve. And it lasts for like freaking ever. It's like a 30 or 45-second spell. It's a very long spell. And then the last lore they reveal today is the Lore of the Tempest, which the Lore of the Tempest has the following spells. The Gust of True Flight. So this one is you pick a friendly shooting unit, and they gain bonus range and accuracy. I really wish this was a spell type we saw more of. I really wish there were more spells that either helped or hindered shooting units, because I feel like very little magic interacts with shooting units. And if you overcast it, it becomes an AoE. That's a great spell. I think this is honestly going to be a super good spell in a lot of different armies. Hailstorm is a bombardment where you just throw ice shards at people. Medium-sized areas bombarded with projectiles. Overcast version lasts longer. It has even more projectiles. Swiftwing is a area augment. So this one is you drop it on the ground, and all units in that area gain speed and a significant charge bonus increase. And then if you overcast it, it has an even larger area of effect. So if I had to guess, it probably starts at like 30 or 40 meters and then goes up to like 55. But this is going to be super duper good, like especially if you have cavalry. If you're using bears, either with the ones if you're using any kind of bears, I feel like this is going to be a big one for you. Fighting Wind is a long column damage spell, so like Penumbral Pendulum and such. And it just slides through and deals a lot of damage. If you overcast it, deals even more damage. The Hawks of Mishka. So the Hawks of Mishka summons it's your big vortex spell. Well, it's not your big one, but it is a vortex spell, so it is kind of like Purple Sun or Banishment or the other ones that move randomly. So you cast it in an area, and then once it has been summoned, it'll wander around. So this one summons a big vortex that deals damage and applies Discouraged to enemies. So that's really nice, because that means it's going to be nuking their leadership, which if you time it correctly with some other stuff, can give them a really bad time. And then the last spell, which is the one they actually have selected, is Blizzard, which Blizzard summons a big old vortex that applies Frostbite. So not only is it a large damaging vortex, but it looks like it's actually going to... it looks like it's a stationary vortex, if I'm understanding correctly, and it applies Frostbite. So you catch up your enemies in it, and they get stuck. Like they can't get out of it. They're just going, just getting messed up. Overcast version deals more damage, which is fantastic. And here we can see it's got a 20-meter radius. You drop it on the ground, lasts for 15 seconds, and it deals 3 damage per second at 100% armor piercing. So you catch a unit in this, and none of it's going to be mitigated by their armor, and that's 3 damage per second to every single entity standing in it. So if you drop it on a unit, every single guy in that unit is taking 3 damage per second for 15 seconds, which can be devastating if you land it correctly, especially on units that don't have a lot of health per model, or are like super elite unit models, or units that maybe don't have a lot of health because they rely on their armor and stuff. And then, of course, at the end, they say, these are all the new lores, though rumors abound of another source of power in the Cathayan borderlands. Obviously, ogres. Obviously, Lore of the Great Maw. So we've got one last lore of magic to be revealed in Total War Warhammer, but I am so excited they just revealed all the lores. They could have easily kept Slaanesh and Nergal and waited for them to be revealed, and then like done a day for each of those lores, but they didn't. They just got it all out of the way at once, which I actually really appreciate. So I'm super excited. I think the new lores of magic look great. I think the lore I'm the most excited for personally is the lore of Nergal or the lore of Yin. I think those are my 2 favorite lores so far. But I would love to know what y'all think. What, for you guys, which lore of Magic is looking the most exciting for y'all? Please let me know. Let me know, like, what's your most exciting? Maybe what's your the spell you're the most excited for? For Nergal, for me, I think Curse of the Leper is the one I'm the most excited for. Increasing armor and reflecting damage in melee, that sounds like a blast. And just making, like, those super tanky Nergal units so much more punishing than they already were. So, yeah, let me know what the new lore of Magic you're the most excited for, and if you can, pick one of the spells and tell me why. So, I'd love to see that down in the comment section, and I'll see you guys around. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.